And here he is, Joe McDonnell himself of Howell Laboratories. Hey, Joe, how are you?
Good, Gene. How are you?
Welcome to the show. We're so glad to have you. You and I have had a long-standing client relationship. I've been helping Howell Laboratories. For those who might wonder what is it that Howell Laboratories does, because it sounds a little bit scientific, and you and I know that it's not necessarily. But maybe you could just tell the listeners what it is you do, your position in the company, what Howell Labs is all about.
Sure. I am the president and CEO of Howell Labs. I've been in that role since January of 2020. And I've been with the company since 2001. The company has been around since 1964. We are located in Bridgeton, Maine, about an hour northwest of Portland, Maine. And we have been supplying equipment to the U.S. Navy since practically the beginning of the company. And our main product lines, we generalize them as fluid treatment systems, but more specifically, we supply a variety of air dehydration systems, air dehydrators of different capacities and sizes, and moisture measurement equipment for the dry air systems that go on the Navy and the U.S. Navy and U.S. Coast Guard ships. We have some version of a dehydrator and moisture measurement unit on every surface ship class in the U.S. Navy. We also supply equipment to the U.S. Coast Guard. Our second line, product line, if you would call it that, is water treatment systems. We have developed potable water disinfectant systems to treat the drinking water aboard Navy, U.S. Navy and Coast Guard ships. And so we started with a unit that we developed for the carriers, aircraft carriers, the larger ships that have the most people on them. And then over the last 15 or 20 years, we've been refining the design and minimizing it and lowering the size and the capacity and the cost so that we can put it on smaller U.S. Navy and Coast Guard ships. We licensed that technology from a company out in New Mexico, and the license agreement allowed us to develop the product lines for the defense industry. So that's primarily what we do. We have offshoots of both of those product lines. And we also are trying to develop some commercial markets related to water treatment as well. But government is our main focus.
Joe, just doing a little public math here. I think you're approaching 60 years as a company.
Exactly. Yes.
That is no small feat. I know of your geographic positioning, somewhat close to Bath Iron Works, a major shipbuilder. But can you link the company's legacy to the federal shipbuilding world? How do you think this came about? What's the company lore?
That's a good question, because the company Howell Laboratories was founded by a gentleman named Pete Howell, and he came from a company called Dielectric, which is just down the road about a half an hour away from us. And Dielectric was formed by some engineers who left what was then RCA in Camden, New Jersey, back in the 1950s. So I kind of imagine that there was some connection to the Navy with RCA, and these guys started Dielectric and sort of stayed in the same market. And then Pete Howell, when he started Howell, he had experience with Dielectric with government dehydrators and government air dry air systems for the Navy. So he just carried that over when he started Howell Laboratories. So I don't know the exact connection, but I suspect that it goes all the way back to RCA, which was either Lockheed now or L3. I'm not sure which, back down in Camden.
Yeah, I'm just thinking to the timeline of the founding. So that's certainly post World War II, post Korea, but
Yes.
across the country, businesses were recognizing that, hey, those companies that supported the federal government during the wars seem to be doing pretty well.
Hmm.
And so I would imagine that Mr. Howell saw a similar opportunity and has made those connections.
Yes.
Um, Joe, how long have you been with the company?
Uh, 22 years now. I started as a government contracts officer, and as a matter of fact, I left Bath Iron Works to come to Howell for a better opportunity.
So government contracts officer. So you were working for the government or a actual Bath employee? Because sometimes they have government officials in the shipyard, right?
They do. They have them embedded in the shipyard. No, I was an employee of Bath Iron Works in their contracts department, working on the contracts with the U.S. Navy.
So you've been with the company for a little over 1/3 of its life. Um, did you ever imagine that you would be leading the company? Was that
No,
in your plan, in
it
your
was
vision?
it was not. I enjoyed the company right from the beginning, and found my found my niche doing government contracts work, overseeing what we were doing, making sure we were dotting our i's and crossing our t's with Bath Iron Works and in Huntington Ingalls and Newport News and all of the government shipyards. Making sure we met their requirements and met the government regulations. And then slowly, as uh, time passed and people retired and other people left, it seemed like that was the right time for me. I was at the right place at the right time, I guess you would say.
So I know that Howell is an employee-owned company. Maybe you could talk a little about what that means in terms of the sort of investment the company makes, or the the conservative nature versus the risk profile the company may take. And then I'd like you to link that to when in your career you might have seen that, hey, I could be part of this leadership team, or if somebody saw that in you, maybe you can make those connections for us.
Sure. Yes, Howell Labs is what's called an ESOP. We have an employee stock ownership plan, and we are 100% employee owned. Back in the mid 1990s, the president at the time, the stockholders, private stockholders, wanted to liquidate their stock, and he was looking around for ways to keep the company viable, and he was concerned that the company would be bought by a competitor and shut down. So ESOPs were a relatively new idea back then, but the management at the time decided they would go that route. So the company took a loan out, bought the shares of stock from the private shareholders, and then paid the loan back over 6 or 7 years. And what that means is that every employee has this retirement plan, and you get allocated shares of stock upon the retirement of an employee. Their shares get bought back by the ESOP and distributed to everybody else according to a formula. And there's no investment by the employees made. So this is essentially free, if you want to call it, free retirement plan. We started as a majority owned when they took the loan out in 95, and we became 100% owned in 2013. So what that means is we don't have, and we say this as management, and I say this at company meetings all the time, we don't have public shareholders by the thousands or the millions out there that we have to answer to. We don't even have private shareholders that are unseen and pulling strings out of the picture. We all own the company. Everybody owns the company, everybody that works here. And so where that can make a difference for us is in the culture. We try to remind people that they, besides working hard, and they should be working smart and making decisions that are in the best interest of the company. Where management and supervisors come in is helping them to understand how they do that in their specific job. But the overall, motivation is everybody wants to do what's best for the company because it affects them directly, as well as all their coworkers right next to them. So it's an interesting concept. It's gaining some steam. There's more and more ESOPs around. In fact, my son just interviewed for a job out in Albuquerque, and it's with an ESOP, and they were surprised that he knew anything about ESOPs at all. And he said, well, my dad works at an ESOP, so I guess I have the inside track. So I think, what that means is when we hire people, when we interview people, we're looking for people that can get along with others, work well as a team member. They're not afraid to speak up, come up with new ideas, and contribute in whatever way they can. And so I think as we grew as an ESOP, maybe the previous management saw in me that I was a good fit in this role, because that's somewhat comes naturally to me, and I can encourage that in other people, that I kind of get people to relax and they don't feel the hierarchy as much. There's less of it's less about your position in the company. Everybody can contribute. We started a lot of committees to work on facilities and on innovation, and we're trying to get people involved in all of that at every level. And I encourage everybody to speak up and, contribute your ideas. I mean, of course, you still have to have management. Somebody has to make decisions, but I try to be very transparent about how we make the decisions that we make, and always try to couch it in terms of how does this affect the company? How does this affect the ESOP? And maybe somebody saw that in me that I didn't even see.
As somebody who's worked with the company for almost 10 years now, I observe that there's a steadiness to the leadership that's very evident to anybody in the company. And I think anybody who knows the company from the outside can see that there's a steadiness and a sort of a deliberate nature to how the company executes. You mentioned that employees may not feel the same kinds of pressures, and the management team may not feel the same kinds of pressures that come with the requirement to produce a quarterly number for an anonymous stock profile. People understand how the company's doing, and they recognize that they have an ability to participate in that. You mentioned committees. I typically pontificate that committees are a terrible thing in most organizations, because they tend to diffuse accountability. But in your culture and in your situation, it actually improves accountability because those individuals do have a level of buy-in that's quite different when they're not only their livelihood, but their future livelihood is very clearly linked to their performance and their actions in those committees.
Absolutely. And we see that all the time. For instance, the facilities committee, we've been getting some work done around here. Part of what we're trying to do is to upgrade the facility so that it's obviously safe, keep it safe, but also pleasant to look at. But it's interesting to watch the dynamics of that committee, because everybody is paying attention to how much things cost. So nobody wants to spend too much to do certain things, but we know we have to get it done. So it's actually fascinating to watch the committee work and try to figure out what's the best way to get the landscaping done? Who should we go with? What should we do about getting some doors fixed and some of the other, restrooms and things like that? It sounds like a great idea if you're not paying for it to spend lots of money, but everybody knows that it all comes out of our pocket in a sense. So it's a good balance. It's really a good balance there. And I didn't address your other question. We don't have the pressures of public shareholders or even private shareholders, but we do have the obligation to protect the employees' accounts, so to speak, their shares of the company. Besides the moral or the ethical obligation, there are Department of Labor regulations that are very specifically spell out the personal liability that management in particular has to ensure that the accounts of the retirement accounts of the employees are protected. And so that trickles into all of our other decisions. That makes us a little more risk averse than maybe somebody else would be, because we are transparent with our information. So we're telling everybody what we're thinking of doing, and we get feedback on whether people think it's a good idea for us to invest in certain ways or go in certain directions. Now, again, it's not a democracy. Some of us have to make some decisions, but it's good to be held accountable, because I have to explain those decisions to everybody. So why we did something or why we didn't do something. But it is very clear that we've got to keep that in mind as we do our strategic planning and make our decisions to move the company ahead.
As you were describing that requirement that you look out for employee interest, the word that was coming to mind was transparency. That you are very transparent in what unfolds within the company, what some of the options were. I saw how you handled COVID, internally and externally, and some of the requirements that were not so popular that were necessary in order to continue working. Even though the industry was labeled a critical industry, there were still some day-to-day things that had to be done that were not necessarily wildly popular, but for the good of the company, people bought in.
Yes.
Joe, I want to just touch on your perception of things that you observe in the defense industry. I've highlighted you in my community as a ringmaster, somebody who is succeeding in an unusual way within the industry. And your longevity certainly speaks for it, but the company's revenue profile continues to improve under your leadership. And we will highlight that in our ringmasters session in November in San Diego. But maybe you could just share a couple of things for the audience that you've learned about how to succeed in the federal environment. It's not easy. You're doing it for a long time and doing it well. What can you offer those that are maybe not experiencing the same success?
Well, I think you have to be in it for the long haul. Obviously, I wasn't here from the very beginning, but even in my experience here, nothing comes quick or easy with the federal government. And so in terms of getting products, to us, it's pretty simple. We want to get the Navy to specify our products to put on every ship class that they come up with. And so there's a lot of behind the scenes work that goes along with getting a piece of equipment classified as class standard equipment. There's a lot of work with the engineering community, the technical community, and we have a lot of experience in our engineering department in terms of knowing not just who to talk to, but how to talk to the Navy engineers, because the Navy, the spectrum of experience that the Navy engineers has is very broad. You can have somebody that's been there 35 years, and you can have somebody that's right out of school that doesn't know anything about the ship specs and the shock requirements and the vibration requirements. And we're finding that with the new FFG class that we're basically holding the hand of Marinette Marine, their engineers and their contracts people as well, because they're new. A lot of them are new to government contracts, and they've said openly they're relying on us to help them get through the process. So because we have the knowledge and the experience, we're walking them through, the engineers through how to understand the requirements, shock, vibe, EMI, and we're helping the contracts people figure out how to get changes done and get orders issued that don't adversely affect us. So it's a lot of behind the scenes work, a lot of talking, having patience, because one small cog in the Navy wheel can cause you a big problem, and you can't go around them, and you can't just flip out at them and expect that they're going to change. You have to work within the system, but it takes a lot. And I think that's a competitive advantage for us. And a lot of companies don't want to spend the time understanding the complex Navy or Department of Defense regulations. So that's the biggest thing. I mean, we are also in talking to the engineers and in talking to the broader technical community, trying to figure out what their needs are, what's new and different that we can do, new and different to us that the Navy or the Coast Guard has a need for. That's challenging as well, because there's so many parties involved in this whole process, from the program office to the engineers to contracts people and planning yards. It's tough to keep track of all of that, but that's something that we feel we need to do, and we can offer something new to the Navy and to the Coast Guard. We're an established manufacturer, but that doesn't mean we can't do more than what we've done already. So we have a lot of outreach going on. I think I would say that's the biggest thing. If you find a niche to get in, that's great, but you got to keep expanding it and looking for new things. The Navy's always talking about the supplier base shrinking. And so we keep saying, we're part of the supplier base. We're here. We know the system, we know the rules, we know how to design things, we know how to manufacture things, weld things to the Navy standards, paint them to the proper standards, give us more work, help us find other things that we can do for you. It's an ongoing struggle, but it's certainly the way to go.
There's some ironies here in that the supplier base is shrinking by the numbers. The Aerospace Industries Association identified that in 2021 it shrank by 5% alone, and in the last 10 years there's other research that confirms it has shrunk by as much as 25%. And even though we don't know the exact number of companies, because there are always new companies coming in, so that number is a little fungible. But you're also describing an irony that we need a rotation of new people coming into the industry, and there's all sorts of workforce development efforts across industry to try to help with that, and it requires some experienced hands to bring those new people along, as you described. I often differentiate experience from expertise. You can do something for 20 years and not get any better at it, but you can develop expertise such that you can then share the most relevant of those experiences to help those new people matriculate into the process. It's really fascinating, and I see that it's a key to your to the company's longevity and your ability to articulate that and then direct your team toward the government offices. I think is probably one of your secret weapons that people don't necessarily see until they know you for some time and see how you operate.
Yes. Yeah, it's something that takes a while to figure out, and we've learned the hard way over the years, and I think we have a good process in place now and a good system. We just have to keep pounding away and making the connections and uncovering new opportunities.
So I would offer for those listening that you're not describing secret back doors that are out there. These things do happen in daylight and in plain view of others. Yet there's no how-to book for how to sell your thing to the federal government. And what it is you're selling may change based on what the federal government wants.
Right. Correct.
Do you feel like you have codified some of your processes or outreach?
To some extent, yeah, I think we can feel like we're in a groove sometimes where we know who to talk to and what the process is. I mean, but there's an ongoing need to find new things to do. So in that sense, some parts of what we do, we're very good at, we're very well established, and we have a rhythm and we get the contracts that we need. But trying to find new business, sometimes it feels like you're on the outside looking in again. There's so many agencies, and it's hard to connect the dots as to who to talk to. You know, we hear anecdotally from different supply activities that they need parts built and they don't have anybody to do it because the original vendor went out of business. But try to pin them down as to exactly what you need and send me a drawing and let me look at it. And it's you hit a brick wall sometimes. So it's persistence, I guess, and maybe being a little innovative and sort of keep trying until you get the right person.
Since Howell has the long view as part of its success, let me ask you to make a prediction. I sometimes make predictions, and they're sometimes right, sometimes wrong. But if you don't predict, then you're just waiting for the future to come to you. But what does the 10-year picture look like for Howell Laboratories? If I were speaking to the president of Howell Labs in 10 years, what do you think that conversation would be about?
I think it would be about that we would be about us still being a staunch government contractor. I don't think that that's going to change. We're going to be continuing to look for opportunities to stay in the Navy system and supplying equipment. I would say that maybe the equipment that we supply may be different at that point, or slightly different, somewhat, maybe not radically in 10 years, because the government moves at such a snail's pace. So can't imagine we'd be a totally different company then. But we would probably also be talking about what we're doing in the commercial world, because the history of Howell Labs is that we've always tried to develop business outside of the government to potentially offset any downturns in the defense business. We purchased a company called Shively Labs back in 1979 that did FM broadcast antennas and other associated equipment. And that at the time was about equal in value or equal in revenue to Howell's government business. But as anybody can tell, the FM business has slowly declined over the years, maybe not slowly, maybe it's probably accelerated over the last 10 years. So we just sold Shively and divested ourselves of that business because it wasn't economically viable anymore for us. But we are looking at other opportunities to develop a commercial business to, again, potentially offset any downturn in the Navy business. So I would say in 10 years, you'd probably be talking about what we've done to develop a commercial market, which is.
And you, just to shout out a little bit, you've recently made an acquisition. So this is not a new concept for you to buy the right sort of company to expand your interests.
Yes, we started very small. We bought a small powder coating business that's local, but despite them being only a 3-person company, they have done our government powder coating of our government products for years, and they do very high quality work. They meet all of the government requirements. We've never had a problem with them. So we saw an opportunity to sort of help the solo owner and stabilize their business a bit. We are not a huge company, but we're larger than they are, so we could offer some benefits of handling some of their non-powder coating parts of the business, administration, accounting, invoicing, HR, and it lets them focus on just the core business of powder coating. And we plan to expand the business. We're going to add a person and maybe a second person from here, and make that a source of revenue for us, and also save us money by being part of the company instead of a vendor. And we would consider doing that again if there are other people in the supply chain, that other companies that would make sense to do that with, or something that's not somebody that's not part of the supply chain. It just has a core business that is similar to ours, and we understand, and we think we can buy it and develop and expand it.
Joe, thanks so much for sharing with us and pulling back the curtain a little bit on Howell Laboratories. Great to have you here.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.